what's going on, everyone? This is Eric B. Horn, VP of Branding, and welcome to another episode of the Voice of HR podcast, where we provide tools, tips, and resources for African Americans and human resources. And today is a very special episode because we want to highlight our very valuable business partners. And today's expert, and I definitely call her an expert, she was one of the first people that I had a very good conversation when I was the VP of membership. When I got off the phone, I'm like, I like her. I like her a lot, not only based off of her expertise, her relatability, but just being an overall great person. So on today's episode, I'm going to interview Dr. Robin Johnson. So even before we get into Dr. Johnson and her area of expertise, let me give you a brief summary about her. She's a change leadership advisor. Her expertise is creating end-to-end change management plans and working with employees who have been identified as change agents in their organization. She also provides coaching and training in the areas of emotional intelligence, 360, and change style assessments. She has her doctorate, doctorate in strategic leadership, and last but not least, and when I was just going through her bio, this stood out because she's a fellow author. She's an author of the book, Leaders Don't Have to Be Lonely, Leaders Don't Have to Be Lonely, Eliminate the Loneliness and Lead Like a Coach, which is a full mindset change management understanding. But before we get into all of that, Dr. Johnson, welcome to the Voice of HR podcast. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm good. And thank you very much, Eric. I'm so excited to be here.
We are so excited to have you. So the area of expertise for Dr. Johnson is change leadership, like I said before. So when we get into all the great things about change leadership, the first question that I always like to ask, just so the audience can gain a better understanding of who you are. So who is Dr. Robert Johnson, and what inspired you to start DesignOrg Solutions?
Yeah, good question. So, as you mentioned, I am a change leadership advisor, and I primarily work with organizations who have just gone through a merger or an acquisition. So I work in the integration space, and it just works so well for me because it gives me the opportunity to really just be who I am, which is curious, asking lots of questions, challenging the status quo. Why are you doing things the way you're doing them? And, I'm a rule challenger, which is, I guess, a little different from a rule breaker, but I am definitely a rule challenger because I want to know who came up with this policy. Why are we doing things this way? And so that all works really well when I'm operating with an organization who have just integrated two organizations and they're trying to become one. So that's who I am. How did I get started in this madness? Well, I was working in a pharmaceutical manufacturing setting. Initially as a trainer, I was doing training in the quality department or in the quality organization, and moved out of that organization into a new organization that they had created called Operations Excellence, become Six Sigma certified, and started working on all of these continuous improvement projects. And as I was sitting with my team, we'd be discussing projects, and I'd always ask, so have you talked to the person yet whose process you are about to change? And they would all say no. And I'm like, well, how are you about to change their process and you haven't had a conversation with them yet? So that was my intro into change management. Well, I left that organization and then moved to a much larger Fortune 500 company who had just acquired another Fortune 500 brand, and the integration did not go well at all. So they brought in this whole turnaround management team to come in and fix this organization. And so that, I always say that that was trial by fire. Every day, you may have wanted to just leave in tears because it was just such an awful, chaotic, us versus them environment. And so that's where I really got my grounding in how do you move people from point A to point B? How do you get people to adopt the changes that are happening within the organization that they have absolutely no control over? And we were dealing with 3 unions
Oh, wow.
within that. Yeah, 3 unions within that organization. And two of the unions, they were willing to work with management right off the bat. The larger of the 3 unions, it was a very combative environment. It was, if you don't like what the management is telling you to do, here's a business card to an attorney.
Yep.
It was that kind of chaos. And so it was eventually not just moving the people who work there, but it was moving the union leadership to a place where they were willing to work with us. And all of that is a part of the change leadership. So that's how I got started. And that's why I am where I am today. And so because of that, I focus, my business focuses on very large scale transformations such as mergers and acquisitions.
Seems like you can write your own book just based off of that 3 union type situation, because everyone, they will want change, but they're not willing to change, which is crazy within itself. And uh, people have made their sustain their whole careers by not changing, and whether it's as a result of that, either their businesses failed or
Yeah,
advanced in the way that it could have if they brought someone in like yourself to make those quick adjustments, which is crazy within itself. And
yeah,
to segue on that, a lot of organizations, especially what's going on right now, they need to change to sustain themselves. But
sure.
when you are working with an organization, what are some of the top 3 tips that you do to implement change within an organization successfully?
So top 3 that I do. So I want to know, why are we doing this? Let's make sure that we really know why we're doing what we're doing and what does good look like, so that we know if we've arrived, right? Because we can change and change and change. We can change systems, we can change equipment, we can change policies, we can even change people. But at the end of this thing, what does good look like? So that's the first thing I want to know. Second thing I want to know, and second tip is understand up front, understand what can we change and what are you just unwilling to change? Because again, we go through the motions of trying to figure out, new policies and new procedures, and do we need to buy new equipment? And then you tell us, oh yeah, no, we don't want to change that. And then thirdly, I think one of the things that really, really, really helps is understanding the culture of the organization that you are actually doing the change in. Understand how the leaders lead, understand how they make decisions, how quickly they make decisions. If you're trying to make a decision, do you need to go through a group of 10 people, or can you just make the decision and then deal with the consequences if the decisions aren't correct? So, and that's a huge one, because it's in a time of change, people don't like uncertainty. So you need to be able to make decisions quickly, and hopefully quick decisions that make sense and that will stick. And so if I have to go through, 8 people before I can get a decision made, we've got some problems.
Okay. And so it seems like to sum it all up, is just having a detailed conversation, asking those questions, asking those hard questions in some organizations, and getting an open and honest answer. So that can help with the overall process of the change. And it's funny, it seems so simple, but
Yeah,
a lot of organizations, they avoid it because of the fact that they're not really trying to change, as opposed to just being upfront and saying, okay, out of the 5 things that we need to change as an organization, we know we're only going to change 2 and just move forward. It's funny how
Yeah.
project get dragged out by people not being upfront about what they're willing to change and what they're not willing to change, which is crazy. So I'm glad you talked about that. So
But
oh, go ahead, please go.
so I
Please.
was going to say, but sometimes the opposite also happens, is that they decide, they being leadership, decide that they're going to do like a big bang change, and they're going to change 5 things
Mm,
versus only changing 2 things, which causes it creates its own chaos.
okay. So it can kind of be detrimental on both ends in a
Yeah.
sense. Okay.
Yeah.
Ask the key questions to get the key answers and the truthful answers up front. Even though some situations you may have to pull back layers, to your point, if you have to ask 8 people to implement a change, that's a drawn out process within itself. And you can see where the breakdown is.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So speaking of change, everybody knows in the world in 2020, the biggest challenge is this overall pandemic. And based off of what I've seen from the career management and from the job perspective, one of the biggest changes for companies to do to just adjust, even though we're still in the midst of the pandemic, is to blatantly let people go because they're not hitting their overall numbers. But with you
Yeah.
being a change management expert, how are organizations executing change during this pandemic?
Yeah. So it depends on what changes the organizations are in the midst of. So I have a client who, again, just just merged. It was an acquisition. And so, we're in integration. So we're still trying to integrate all of their processes. And but because we are in the midst of a pandemic, which means that, their customers aren't necessarily purchasing as much as they were before the pandemic, they've had to furlough their sales organization.
Yeah.
Another one of my clients has done the same thing. They've had to furlough their sales organization. So they don't want, of course, they don't want to let people go. And they know that at some point they're going to need them once again, and so they're also trying to change models. They're changing how they do their work to accommodate, the pandemic. So they're making it work. And thankfully, my clients have not had to lay off people. Furlough is hard enough, but they haven't had to lay off people.
Which is, I mean, that's a blessing within itself.
Absolutely.
If you didn't, so now, you can add to your professional resume, you're a job saver, because based on some of the things that you've implemented or still implementing are helping people with their overall jobs, which is being very proactive, because
Sure.
a lot of times with the change, people are in a reactive state, especially, for example, when it comes to retail and hospitality. Based off of everything that's going on, the main thing is, okay, the numbers aren't looking right. Where do we need to trim the fat? And
Mhm.
sometimes if companies would take a step back, maybe they can come up with other options, because the industries are going to bounce back. It may not bounce back
Sure.
this
Sure.
year, but it's going to bounce back as people become more comfortable with coming out and traveling and things of that nature. I mean, we're seeing a little bit of that right now. I mean, it takes
Hmm.
a hit, but eventually things will go back to normal. Or if they are implementing some strategic change, they can look at this situation, figure out how they can move forward based off of strategies and things of that nature, which is
Yeah.
key. So
Now, what I will say to you, Eric, though, is that when a company goes through a merger or an acquisition, that in itself creates uncertainty.
mhm,
And so for employees who say they were completely loyal to the organization, never even considered leaving the organization, as soon as the organization goes through this integration, it all of a sudden creates this panic in people's minds. Oh my gosh, what's going to happen to me and what's going to happen to my job, right? And so recruiters, it's the best time for a recruiter to hit up an employee because they know that that employee is in a state of uncertainty, and people will take a lesser role or even a lesser paid role just for the sake of being certain.
Mm, okay.
So companies who go through integrations are at risk of losing high potential employees because they're marketable. They can go someplace else. And if they really dislike uncertainty, they will go someplace else. Add on to that a pandemic. And now we've increased the level of uncertainty even further.
Right.
And so, it's just a really hard time for organizations, because they are losing high potential employees to go someplace where they're more certain about who they are, where they can, how they can fit into the organization if they're going to have a job. So just wanted to throw that in because those are other realities that we have to think about during this pandemic.
And that's key because I didn't even think about that the level of certainty. You don't want to, they say don't build your house on sand, so you don't want to be at a company that is, if it's not sinking now, just based on how the market is going, you see, okay, hotels are closing at a rapid rate. The chance that this may happen to the hotel that I work for, it may happen again. So how can I pivot? How can I change? How can I adjust to make sure that I still have a job? Because that 40 million individuals who are laid off, that's a huge number, and people need to work because they need to support themselves. Or
Exactly. Yeah.
it's very critical. So let's dig a little bit deeper when it comes to you working with clients. We don't have to give client names and things of that.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure there's been a situation where you've come into an organization and they were really resistant about changing, but based off of your level of expertise and you seeing the end goal of how they can still be successful, how did you go in to change their mindset and then eventually get them to the point to say, okay, we were resistance to this change in the beginning within the organization, but based off of your expertise, it helped push us even further into the successful marketplace?
Yeah. So in thinking about that question, fortunately for me, I'm always brought in because the organization realized that they need change management.
Okay.
That's, again, my primary client is one who's going through or has gone through the merger or closed the deal of a merger or an acquisition. So we're now going through integration or some very large scale implementation like an ERP system. So they already know that they need the management of the change. The challenges I face is, okay, so you're going to implement this system, but they may be resistant to making the changes that need to happen so that we can implement the system.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay. So, I may have a conversation with a leader and say, well, have you considered, ABC? Why is this happening? Have we done a root cause analysis to understand why, you're responsible for all of these things, which you're really not responsible for? Why have you taken this on? And then the challenge becomes, oh, well, they have a bunch of excuses why they are holding on to these things they don't need to hold on to. And so that's where my challenge is getting them to understand you don't have to hold on to, this burden. You can actually let it go. But for a lot of them, having that burden makes them feel important, right? Having that burden says, you need me. And, you won't let me go because I have all of this.
Right.
I have all of this responsibility. You can't let me go. You need me. And so, those are my types of challenges.
And that's critical, especially when it comes to HRIS, because you may have, a human resources team is significantly big based off of the certain endeavors. But to your point, if you have someone doing X, Y, this, and this, that touches on a high level of emotional intelligence, which is something that is, critical for you also, because if someone feel the the need to feel important
Yeah.
sometimes segues into, okay, you need to keep me here because I can do X, Y, and Z. However, if the new system that's being implemented can automatically do what you do manually, it puts your job at
Yeah,
risk.
exactly.
So
Exactly.
it can hit their emotional intelligence. So I'm glad that, when they bring you in, they understand that there is, you know, the change is coming, but it still seems like you have to juggle a lot of balls and juggle a lot of people, because to your point, they may be resistant to that change because they may say, wait, that means if this system comes into play, I may not have a job. Let me,
Exactly. Yeah, right.
yeah, yeah. So it's just within itself. So I'm gonna wrap up in a minute. So based off of your expertise and what you told us today, I'm pretty sure that there are companies that are in the process of changing and they need your overall expertise. So can you let us know, what overall services that you provide for a company if they want to bring you in?
Yeah. So good question. Thanks for asking. So primarily it's change leadership advising. What does that mean? That means that I will put together a change management plan for this project. And then I'll work with the employees of this organization to implement the plan. And so this model works well for organizations who they know that they need help managing the change, but they have not hired or they have not uh, added a full-time change management person into their project budget.
Okay.
Right. So, but they know they need it. And quite frankly, Eric, a lot of times, organizational leaders realize that they need someone to help them come in and change and manage the change, like way after the project has already started. Right. So the project started in March and it's now like September, and they're like, oh my God, we need somebody to help us do this. And so because of that, they haven't included a person like me into their budget full time.
Right.
So I'll just come in and create the change management plan and then work with employees to get it done. The other thing, because I've been doing this work for so long, and maybe you've heard the statistics, people say that 70% of change initiatives fail.
Right.
They don't succeed. And I can tell you the biggest reason for that is leadership. It's leadership. It's the decisions they make. It's the decisions they don't make. It's how they treat employees as we're going through the change, or how they're not treating employees. And so emotional intelligence in a leader is extremely important, especially if an employee is at risk of losing a job as a result of an acquisition. How do you work with that employee? Do you show empathy? How do you work with that employee? So I offer the emotional intelligence assessments and coaching based on that. And then if we need to do some development opportunities as a result of your emotional intelligence scores, we can. And then lastly, I offer a change style indicator assessment. And so this is kind of new to people, but what it does is it shows you the preferences of change in your leaders. So how do your leaders adapt to change themselves? And so you have three types of preferences. You have the conserver, who is the person, they realize that the organization has to go through change, but if we have to go through change, let's do it incrementally. Let's do it by sticking to the rules. Right. Let's not upset the apple cart. And they may seem a little resistant. And I have to be honest with you, most of the HR professionals that I've taken through this assessment are more on the conserver end. And then on the other extreme, you have the originators. Originators, they're just like, change? Did somebody say change? Let's do it. You know, so they're all about breaking the rules. They don't really care, you know, what policies and procedures you have in place. That's why we're changing. Let's get this done. And then you have those who are in the middle, which is most people. They're in the middle, you know, okay, if we got to change, let's change. But they kind of sit on the fence with it. And so as a leader, if I am the CEO of an organization who's going through major change, I want to know who my leaders are. Do I have more cheerleaders on my team, or do I have more conservers? You know, who do I have? Do I have people who are going to challenge me every step of the way and resist everything that we're trying to do? Or do we have leaders who are like, all right, boss, you said let's do it, so let's do it. So that's what the Changed Out Indicator Assessment offers to leadership.
So it seems like this will be great for companies to bring you in when they're in the midst of hiring a new executive, in a sense, to take them through that overall process, because you have a lot of executive recruiting companies that, I mean, I was just talking to a good buddy of mine, and she told me that business is even revving up even more, even in the midst of the chaotic change that's going on right now. Because a lot of these companies, one of their overall adjustments is, okay, we need to bring new leadership in to adjust to everything that's going on. So it just seems like companies, if they really want to excel even more, it would make sense for you to bring them in and have that assessment while they're in the process of hiring their new leadership, especially when it comes to how do people pivot and adjust to change, because it never ceases to amaze me how the decision of one executive can impact 30, 40, 50,000 people when it comes to their job. So
absolutely,
you know, was that the right decision? Of course, you have to look at the numbers, but as a leader, whether it's the HR or the CIO or the COO or the CEO, how did they approach this overall change? Did they look at other options as opposed to just saying, okay, the numbers don't look right, we need to cut 20,000 people?
Yeah.
So that's very critical. Hint, hint, companies that are looking at this podcast to definitely bring you in, because that's key, you know?
Yeah.
And to your point, I mean, I'm not in these executive rooms yet, but if they would do all of this prior to bring a leader in, that may get them to the point to say, well, you know what, based off of this assessment, I think we need to go with our number 2 choice as opposed to our number 1 choice, because how they would handle change based off of this assessment may not be the right fit for the overall culture and where we are and where we're trying to go and things of that nature. Because making that decision, whoever the leader is, it impacts so many things.
Exactly.
You want to make sure that you make the right decision.
Exactly.
You know, board of directors.
Or in the other case is that you've made a decision that this is the person that you're going to hire, and so you want to know, you want to have an assessment of how all of your leaders adapt to change. And so this is something that you can provide to your new hire as a part of their onboarding, so that they understand how they change, and their direct manager can understand how they change and how you change today. And then the great thing about this assessment is that, yes, I will then tell you based on your score whether you're a conserver, pragmatist, or an originator. But there are things you can do now that you know that about yourself. There are things you can do so that you become more collaborative.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great. So we talked about a lot, right? So
we did.
One of the things I wanted to circle back with you being, you know, a change management expert, advisor, author, and you know, even before we got on the line, you was telling me, you know, the projects that you have going on. So you have a lot going on, but I'm always thinking about the next step. So with everything that you have going on, what's next for Dr. Robin Johnson?
Well, next will be retirement, Eric. Now, that may not happen for a bunch of years, but immediately it would be, it's just really just growing the business and just helping as many leaders as I possibly can, just to be the best leaders they can be, because we spend an awful lot of time working, and being about business. And so that's what's next. It's just, how can I help as many people as I can help before I retire?
Okay, great. So if you are listening to this podcast or viewing this podcast, I hope you gained a lot of insight and a lot of information when it comes to overall change. I think the overall gist is, whether you are a corporation or HR professional, you must embrace change. You cannot run from it. However, when it comes to a professional standpoint, you have wonderful professionals like Dr. Johnson that can help you pivot and adjust for that overall change for your further success. So if you had any other questions, comments, concerns about Dr. Johnson, I'll make sure that we have her information below the podcast so you can reach out to her. You can hire her. She will get your company in the right direction. So before we sign off, Dr. Johnson, did you have any last words, any things of that nature?
Only call me.
So thank you guys for your time, your effort, and your energy. And we will see you on the next podcast. You guys have a good one.